The following content is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. This is the verbatim federal courtroom testimony of the Sean Diddy Combs trial as reported by Inner City Press. No edits, no filters, just the raw truth, straight from inside the courtroom. I thought Diddy cared, until the court showed me what I refused to see. Part 1-6. They called me Jane in court. It's not my real name, but in some ways it's become my armor. I was once close to Sean Diddy Combs. To many, he's a mogul, a legend, an icon. To me, for 3 years, he was something else entirely. Complicated, consuming, powerful in ways that words don't always capture. We met in 2021. I was drawn to his presence, not just because he was famous, but because he had that rare quality. He made everyone feel seen. When he chose to focus on you, it was like standing in sunlight. We started dating. It felt surreal at first. Private flights, exclusive dinners, whispered dreams about the future. I genuinely believed I had found someone who wanted to build a life with me. But things weren't as beautiful behind the scenes. The first signs were subtle. Expectations of my availability, of my loyalty, of how I should spend my time. He never said it outright, but I felt them. Over time, what I thought was affection began to feel like control. He paid my rent, he helped me financially, and whether he meant to or not, that power dynamic started to shift everything. There were recurring situations, social arrangements he expected me to help organize. I won't go into specifics, but I'll say this. I often felt like my comfort wasn't the priority. My feelings were acknowledged, but then dismissed. Every time I voiced discomfort, the conversation would end with him reassuring me that it was all good. But it wasn't. At one point, I remember texting him that I didn't feel right about something. I said I wasn't in the mood, I was tired and overwhelmed. He replied with kindness, or so I thought. All good, he wrote. But later I found out, through evidence shown in court, that shortly after that message, he contacted someone else to try and change my mind. He didn't accept my no. He simply went around it. I never saw that message until the prosecution presented it. And when I did, it felt like the floor dropped out from under me. That's when I started to understand. My boundaries weren't being respected. They were being managed. I started keeping notes on my phone, thoughts, feelings. I didn't plan to use them in court. They were for me, to try to make sense of the confusion I lived in. One entry read, I feel obligated. 98% of the time, I go along with things because I don't want to disappoint him. I didn't realize how deeply those words would matter later. People always ask, why didn't you leave? And the answer is layered. I loved him. Or I loved the version of him I thought was real. I thought things could change. I thought maybe I wasn't trying hard enough. And yes, I was scared. Not just of him, but of losing everything I'd built around this relationship, security, connection, even my sense of worth. Then, in late 2023, Cassie filed her lawsuit. I read it. I cried. I felt seen. There were parts that echoed my own life so closely it made me nauseous. I began to wonder how many other women were living inside similar stories, silent, uncertain, and ashamed. That was the turning point. I decided to speak. But speaking meant opening myself up, not just to scrutiny from strangers, but to cross-examinations, to old text messages read aloud, to video clips played back frame by frame. The defense tried to paint me as willing, as someone who enjoyed the lifestyle too much to ever walk away. They even pulled up messages where I expressed affection saying I missed him, that I loved him. And those were real too. That's what made it harder, because love isn't always clean, and abuse doesn't always wear a visible face. I told the court, I stayed because I hoped. I hoped things would return to the way they were in the beginning. I hoped the warmth would outweigh the confusion. But mostly, I stayed because I was afraid of what leaving would cost me, emotionally, financially, and even physically. When I look back now, the signs were there, the patterns, the power plays, the silences that weren't really silence but pressure in disguise. And yet, I hugged his lawyer at the end of my testimony. Not because I forgave them, not because I forgot, but because in that moment I needed to show myself that I was still human. that I still had the ability to extend grace, even after being dismantled piece by piece on the stand. This is not a revenge story. This is a story about waking up. And the next part? It only gets more complicated. What happened in Vegas didn't stay there. It followed me to court. By the time 2024 began, I had already lived through years of confusion, fear, and conflicted love. Diddy and I had a complicated relationship. We were on and off. January of that year, we were technically apart, but still emotionally tangled. That month, I took a trip to Las Vegas with someone new, a rapper. I won't name him here, neither did the courtroom, but let's just say he wasn't unknown. In fact, Diddy was close with him, and that mattered more than I realized. I flew on the rapper's private jet. His girlfriend, or wife, I wasn't sure, was with us. It was supposed to be a break from the chaos, a reset. But then something unexpected happened. I ran into Anton. Anton was someone Diddy and I had interacted with before. His presence at that Vegas suite hit me like a cold wind. He was there, in a hotel room, with several others, involved in a situation I had hoped to leave behind. 7 or 8 people were watching. I wasn't part of it, but I couldn't look away. Later, the defense brought up that moment to the jury. They said I had flirted with the rapper, that I had danced, that I'd made comments I shouldn't have, that I kept in touch with Anton afterward. I did. I sent him friendly texts, the kind you send someone when you don't know how to fully let go of a version of yourself you haven't escaped yet. But none of it felt safe. None of it felt free. The defense asked, were you only arranging these situations for Diddy, or did you do it on your own too? The implication was clear, that maybe I wasn't coerced, that maybe this was my lifestyle, my choice. But here's the truth. When you've been trained to ignore your instincts, when your worth has been measured by how much you can tolerate, you don't always know how to say no, not even to yourself. In court, they showed texts between me and Anton, friendly, casual. What time's your flight? Good morning, beautiful. I cringed as the jury read them. They didn't have the full context. They didn't see the fear behind the messages, the part of me trying to stay on good terms with people who were part of a bigger system I hadn't yet broken away from. Diddy found out about the Vegas trip. He wasn't just angry, he was devastated. He told me I'd gone to another man's party and betrayed him. I tried to explain that we weren't together, that I needed space. But space, in his world, wasn't real. There was no such thing as off. That night, everything boiled over. He came to my place. There were candles, champagne, music. I had hoped for a reconciliation, but it quickly turned into something else. We argued. He accused, I denied. I lashed out, threw things, called him names. He returned the energy with force. I won't detail it here, but it escalated to a level I'd never experienced before. It wasn't just emotional anymore, it became physical. In court, the defense dissected everything. Why did you stay? Why didn't you run? Why did you put on makeup if you had bruises? Why didn't you call the police? The questions came like punches, each one asking why I hadn't been stronger, louder, faster, but never once asking why he did what he did. That night didn't end with shouting. It ended with silence, with me curled up behind a wall, hiding for hours, wondering how my life got here. And the next morning, it was as if nothing happened. He took my phone, contacted Anton, told me to prepare for another evening. He said, "Is this coercion?" I said nothing. I just nodded and got ready. That's what I did. I got ready. In court, they said I could have left, that I could have walked away at any time. And maybe that's true. But when you've been conditioned to believe that your safety, your stability, even your identity are tied to someone else's approval, walking away doesn't feel like an option. It feels like jumping without a parachute. That trip to Vegas was supposed to be a break. Instead, it became evidence, not just for the defense, but for me. Evidence that I had to stop pretending things were normal. Because what followed me home from Vegas wasn't guilt. The night everything changed, and the court saw what I tried to hide. I remember June 18th, 2024, not because of the champagne or the music, but because that was the night I stopped lying to myself. Diddy had just come back from a family trip. We hadn't spoken in a few days. I was anxious. Something inside me wanted things to be different that night, to go back to the way they used to be. I set the mood. Candles, music, champagne. A part of me still believed if I could make the space feel soft, he'd soften too. He arrived late. We talked on the patio. We played music. There was a video of us that night, smiling, swaying to Lovely Day. The jury saw it in court. They saw what looked like a happy couple, but what they didn't see was what happened less than an hour later. It started with a suspicion. I had a gut feeling there had been another woman on that family trip. I asked him about it. He brushed it off. I pressed harder. The air shifted. That's when the shouting began. I threw something first. A candle, I think. I was hurt, angry, desperate to be heard. He shouted back. I called him names I won't repeat. He called me crazy. I slammed his head against the counter. That's the part they emphasized in court. That I was the one who started it. But what they didn't ask was what led to that moment. What brought me to a boiling point. I ran to the bedroom. He followed. I changed into something loose, something that made me feel invisible. He kept knocking, kicking the door. I hid in the closet, then behind the wall. For 2 hours, I stayed there, shaking. When I finally came out, I was tired. Not just physically, emotionally. I still remember him looking at me and saying, "You're trying to take me away from my kids." Then, it escalated again. Later in court, the defense pointed out that there were no bruises visible in the videos from days after, no discoloration, no marks. So how could there have been any violence, they asked. But trauma isn't always visible. They asked why I didn't call the police, why I didn't run, why I let him text Anton using my phone, why I didn't stop what came next. And the truth is, I was numb. When you've been slowly worn down over years, your reaction time slows. Your sense of danger blurs. You don't flee. You survive. So when Anton arrived, someone I had known from previous arrangements, I did what was expected. I went through the motions. I smiled. I did my makeup. Not to cover bruises, but to cover pain. The makeup wasn't for him. It was for me, to pretend I was still in control of something. The defense painted a picture of a woman complicit. They said I was choosing this, that I invited it, that I was comfortable. But what they missed is that survival often looks like silence, compliance, smiling when you want to scream. They asked, "Do you consider yourself a strong woman?" I said yes. They paused. Then I added, "But a woman's strength doesn't override a man's." I wasn't saying I was weak. I was saying I was overwhelmed. That even the strongest woman, when cornered long enough, will break. Not because she's fragile, but because she's exhausted from pretending to be fine. At the end of that day in court, something strange happened. After everything, the cross-examinations, the accusations, the emotional dissection, I walked off the witness stand, and I hugged Diddy's attorney. People were stunned. But it wasn't about her. It wasn't even about Diddy. It was about me. A choice. A reclaiming of control. A reminder that I was still human, still capable of grace, even after being spoken to like a case file for hours. That night, I didn't go home feeling victorious. I didn't even feel vindicated. I felt hollow, but also clear. That was the night the court saw what I had buried, and I began to see it too. The evidence I didn't know existed, and the messages I wrote to survive. After stepping down from the witness stand, I thought the hardest part was over, but I had no idea how much more the courtroom still had to unpack and how much more of myself I'd have to confront. The prosecution had gathered more than just my memories. They had messages, voice notes, journal entries I had written to myself in the Notes app, things I never imagined anyone else would read, let alone a jury of strangers. One of those notes was written in December 2023. It said, "I feel obligated. 98% of the time I go along with things just to keep the peace." That note became a focal point in court. The government wanted to use it to show that even when I seemed to agree to things, I was under quiet pressure. But the defense argued it shouldn't be allowed, that it was private, that it lacked probative value. The judge ultimately ruled in their favor. That part of my story, the most vulnerable part, stayed hidden from the jury. It stung, because so much of my experience lived in that space between yes and no, between the desire to please and the fear of conflict. So much of it was unspoken, undocumented, except for what I wrote to myself when no one else was watching. The defense, in contrast, tried to introduce an audio recording, a message from Diddy dated December 20th, 2023, weeks after Cassie filed her lawsuit. In it, he says he never knew how I felt, about the situations we were in, that he didn't realize I had ever felt uncomfortable. They argued that this proved he wasn't aware of my distress, that he wasn't coercing me, because he didn't know I was in pain. But the prosecution pushed back. If he didn't know, why was he saying it now after a lawsuit had already gone public? Was this sincere or strategic? I had my suspicions, because by that point, I'd already told him many times, in text, in voice, in person, and even when I didn't use the perfect words, my silence should have spoken volumes. There were more texts, too. In one, I said, "I know what you want, baby. I'm just not in the mood. I don't want to make you mad." He responded, "All good." It sounded kind, reassuring. But then, not long after, he messaged Paul, someone we both knew, saying, "I need you to persuade her." That moment hit me hard. I never saw that text until it was shown on a screen in court, in black and white. Proof that even when he said all good, he was already looking for ways to override my hesitation. Then there was our trip to Turks and Caicos in early 2023. It was supposed to be for my birthday. I thought it was a gift, a romantic escape. But partway through the trip, the plans changed. He brought someone else along, someone I hadn't agreed to include. I felt blindsided, betrayed, and yet I stayed. I texted Paul afterward, thanking him for showing up. I told him I was tired, sore, emotionally drained. I told him Diddy had made me feel less than human, that he had criticized me over a bracelet, a lavish gift he'd given me and then used as leverage. It wasn't about the jewelry, it was about what it represented. Approval when I complied, disappointment when I didn't. In court, the defense brought up messages where I told Diddy I loved him, that I missed him, that I wanted to watch movies together, to cuddle. They said this proved I was willing, that I was invested. But none of those messages erased the pressure. None of them made what happened okay. Because love, or what I thought was love, doesn't cancel out manipulation. The truth is I loved him. That was real. But I also feared him. I feared losing him. I feared the world that came with him. I feared what he might say or do if I pushed back too hard. So I softened my voice. I made the best of every trip, every night, every silence. And when I couldn't speak the truth aloud, I typed it into my phone, into a note that was never meant to be read out loud. Until now. When the headlines took over, I was still just trying to heal. By the time we reached the middle of 2024, the world had started watching, not just the courtroom, the media, the blogs, the whispers. Suddenly, my private nightmare was public property. After Cassie's lawsuit went viral and news outlets began to dig deeper, the pressure around Sean, Diddy, Combs intensified. Homeland Security raided his homes. Journalists lined up outside court buildings. Social media exploded with speculation and memes. And me? I was still just trying to hold myself together. I never wanted to be part of some grand legal moment. I didn't wake up one morning and decide to go to war. I was just trying to be heard, not by the internet, but by the system that had ignored women like me for years. I know people. During that time, Diddy and I still communicated. I know how that sounds. I know people will ask why. But trauma doesn't follow logic. It loops. It convinces you that the person who hurt you might still be the one who can heal you. There were texts. He said things like, "What can we do to move on?" I don't want you to feel like I wasted your life. And I replied. I told him I had wasted some of my best years, that I had bent myself into someone I barely recognized just to make the relationship work. There were still moments of what looked like affection, photos, videos, laughter, but every smile carried weight. Every message had a shadow behind it. He once told me, "Let's just take a break from each other." I told him, my dumb self thought if I gave more of myself, I'd get what the others got: a vacation, a trip, public affection. I began to understand something painful. I wasn't just chasing love, I was chasing fairness. I wanted to be treated the same way he treated others, and in that race, I'd erased pieces of myself. The prosecution in court tried to show how all of this, the money, the control, the emotional dependency, was part of a pattern. They talked about coercion, pressure, and the blurred lines of financial influence. They asked, when someone ties your safety, your housing, your stability to your obedience, is that still a choice? Meanwhile, the defense pointed out my growing income from online content. They said I was making enough to support myself, that I could have walked away any time. What they didn't understand was that survival is not just about money. It's about mindset. It's about fear. It's about a history of being told, quietly but clearly, you're only safe when you agree. At one point, the defense asked me if I would trade all the gifts, trips, and material support just to not have gone through the trauma. I didn't hesitate. I said, yes, I would give it all back. But when they asked if I'd give up my home, the place I lived with my child, I hesitated. Because it's not just about bricks and walls, it's about identity, about trying to rebuild after being broken down. That apartment wasn't just a place, it was a fragile version of stability that I was desperately trying to protect. They said I had options, and maybe on paper I did. But emotionally, I was trapped. Not in chains, in memories, in hopes that kept being broken, in texts that sounded sweet but carried obligations. In silence, I'd trained myself to survive inside. People think courtroom battles are just about evidence, but for people like me, it's also about exposure. Every word you ever sent, every emotion you ever misread, gets laid out like proof. And yet, I kept showing up, day after day, testifying, answering questions that felt like tiny needles, because somewhere deep down I knew that if I didn't tell the truth now, I might never find peace again. I thought the verdict would heal me, but healing started the moment I stopped hiding. When the final day of testimony ended, there were no applause, no dramatic music, just silence. I stepped out of the courtroom and into a hallway full of reporters I wasn't allowed to speak to. I walked past faces that had watched me cry, break, and rebuild myself, piece by piece, from a seat behind the gallery. I didn't look back at Diddy, not because I hated him, but because I had already said everything I needed to say. That's the thing about surviving something like this. People think it ends with a verdict, but for those of us who lived it, healing doesn't come with the sound of a gavel. It comes slowly through quiet moments when you finally let yourself breathe again. In the final days, the prosecution tried to tie the last threads together. They introduced a summary witness, someone to explain the scale of the evidence. Texts, audio files, financial records. The idea was to show a pattern, not just of control, but of collaboration, an enterprise built on power dynamics that silenced women like me. They brought up Christina Kororum, Diddy's former chief of staff. The tension between us wasn't a secret. I never felt accepted by her or trusted, and it mattered, because when women around powerful men don't protect each other, the silence becomes louder. They showed text messages between staff, where cash was being arranged, where favors were exchanged, where cover-ups were quietly orchestrated. No one had to say it aloud. The structure was built to protect him, but my story, and others like it, threatened that structure. I didn't expect sympathy from the jury. I only hoped for understanding, that they would see beyond the lifestyle, beyond the jewelry and vacations, that they would recognize what happens when someone powerful uses love as leverage. After I testified, I returned to a life that looked the same, but felt completely different. The apartment still had the same couch, my phone still lit up with texts, but I wasn't the same. Something had shifted. I wasn't hiding anymore. A friend once asked me, "Would you go back and undo it all if it meant you never had to go through this pain?" And I said no. Because for the first time in my life, I learned that my voice has weight, that my memories matter, that the years I thought were wasted were actually the years I was learning how to survive. I used to think that being loved by someone powerful made me powerful. But now I know real strength comes from walking away, even when your heart begs you to stay. I don't know what the jury will decide. I don't know how history will remember Sean Combs. But I do know this. I stood up. I told the truth. And for the first time in a very long time, I'm free. Jane.